4 crippled reactors, a constant buildup of contaminated water, radioactive leaks threatening the environment. The people in charge of Fukushima Daiichi are struggling to control the plant. How will they stop the leaks and decommission the facilities? Get the latest on the aftermath of the nuclear accident with in-depth reports and special features. Nuclear Watch, only on Newsline.
Workers go inside Japan's damaged nuclear plant every day, but the public rarely gets a glimpse of what they do. NHK World's Yoichiro Tateiwa went inside the Fukushima Daiichi plant to take a closer look as teams continue the dangerous and complicated job of removing fuel rods from one of the reactor buildings.
This is a part of Japan few people see anymore. We approach Fukushima Daiichi by bus, accompanied by Tokyo Electric Power Company officials. Now we are approaching to the checkpoint set by municipality. This is about 5 kilometers from Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. And beyond here, access is severely restricted. This is where the control center of the Fukushima Daiichi, where we're going to go in. The next step for anyone who wants to get closer to the damaged reactors is to put on protective gear. The workers are removing spent fuel rods from a pool in the reactor 4 building. This unit didn't suffer a meltdown, but radiation levels remain high because it's close to the other reactors where meltdowns did occur. The workers extract highly radioactive spent fuel assemblies from their racks inside the pool and place them in a special container. The whole process is carried out underwater. It shields the radiation emitted by the fuel rods and keeps them cool. Exposing the rods to the air could lead to a massive release of radiation. Workers know there is no room for error. Each team has 6 highly qualified members. 2 men control a crane to remove the fuel assemblies. 2 others work as the eyes of the operation. They control an underwater camera and lighting equipment. They also record the procedure. The remaining pair supervise the operation and keeps track of radiation levels. If they detect high levels, they coordinate an evacuation. 6 teams rotate in shifts of maximum 2 hours per day. To give you an idea of the levels of radiation workers face, this device shows 100 microsieverts per hour, which means if I stand here 10 hours, that would exceed the limit for civilians. But workers here have 50 times higher limit.
So far, radiation levels here have been kept lower than we initially estimated. We will continue our efforts to reduce the workers' risk of radiation exposure as much as possible by improving the working environment.
Once the container is loaded with fuel assemblies, workers transfer it to a storage facility. The teams have to remove more than 1,500 assemblies from the reactor 4 building. Then they will extract fuel from the reactor 1, 2, and 3 buildings. Topical managers say they expect the entire operation to be finished by 2020. Then crew will have to remove molten fuels from crippled reactors. There is no shortage of risk factors here. Workers have many stressful and difficult days ahead of them.
Academics in Japan say the panel that advises the government on nuclear power should change its priorities. The Atomic Energy Commission has spent over 50 years promoting the use of nuclear energy. The academics say its members should focus on tackling problems the industry has created. The experts say the Commission should address a limited number of key challenges. They say those challenges should include disposal of radioactive waste and helping government leaders decide how to deal with the crippled nuclear plant in Fukushima. They say the Commission should also make sure nuclear technology is only used for peaceful purposes such as power generation and research. The experts plan to finalize their recommendations next week.
Today marks 1,000 days since the world's worst nuclear crisis began at Daiichi Nuclear Power Plant in Fukushima, Japan. But despite widespread contamination and the inability to stop hundreds of thousands of tons of radioactive water from pouring into the Pacific, apparently Japan is doing a great job managing the cleanup. This week, the International Atomic Energy Agency actually gave praise to Japan for their excellent cleanup efforts and proactive approach toward addressing complex challenges posed by the nuclear disaster. Ain't that cute? Giving praise to TEPCO, the same company that let mice eat through the wires of the cooling pumps of the nuclear reactors. Not to mention the company's sordid history of falsifying data sets in the years prior to the meltdown to cover up how faulty the reactors really were. As you can see, international media like The Guardian is painting a slightly different picture of the crisis. Look, it's totally irresponsible, but not surprising for the IAEA to be giving props to TEPCO. After all, the entire point of the organization is to promote nuclear energy. This nuclear watchdog is really nothing more than a nuclear lapdog, and it says so right in their charter. Now, aside from TEPCO's gross mismanagement of the fallout, check this out. They've actually hired members of a crime syndicate to help the cleanup. You heard me right. TEPCO hired members of the Yakuza Mafia to help with the Fukushima meltdown. And folks, the irony here is that while Tokyo Electric was outsourcing their problems to professional gangsters, those gangsters were then outsourcing those jobs to homeless Japanese people. Yes, not only was the Yakuza forcing homeless people to work on the hazardous waste site, but they then kicked these people to the curb after they began suffering the deadly effects of radiation poisoning. But hey, I guess that's the kind of proactive approach the IAEA likes to see from its nuclear partners.
While this controversial secrecy bill in Japan has sparked strong public opposition and protests, the bill drastically expands the definition of state secret and increases the possible jail sentence for those found guilty of leaking information to 10 years. According to a poll by Japan's Asahi Shimbun, 61% of voters think the bill is being passed too fast. 3/4 of them think the law would create new secrets rather than strengthening the protection of currently existing ones. Protesters say the bill is an authoritarian move which could lead Japan back to the Second World War era. They said the forced passing of the bill is a form of political terrorism, infringing people's right to know and the freedom of expression.
If the bill is passed, it will represent the covering up of people's ears and voices. We ask that this bill be abolished.
The word secret causes anxiety among people, especially when it is used by the government. Though we don't understand the procedures in the bill, we feel something bad could happen.
Towns and cities in Japan are taking on a seasonal glow as Christmas approaches. Elaborate Christmas displays feature a mix of sound and images. In Tokyo, a unique attraction is capturing people's hearts by letting them help create the magic. NHK World's Akane Nakajima has more.
In a business district in Tokyo, this public square is blanketed with hundreds of thousands of LED bulbs. Blue lights turn the square into a sea of coral and pearls. Animated images of marine life are projected onto this building using projection mapping technology. They tell the story of marine creatures trying to collect Christmas illuminations. The title, White Christmas in the Sea. This spectacular display draws in the crowds. Many people drop by after work to have a look. Organizers expect about 350,000 visitors this year. This program has a special feature. Sounds made by the audiences triggers changes in the projection. When visitors clap their hands, the images change. When the sound of clapping matches the display's soundtrack, a school of fish appears. By applauding, the audience helps the fish defeat their deadly enemy, the shark. Tomoya Takahashi created this program. It took him and his team 2 months to develop.
This system uses microphones to pick up only the sounds of the applause made by the audience.
Projection mapping technology changes images based on the signals from the microphones. Like, for example, first, nothing appears on the screen. But when you clap your hands, the bubbles appear. People are thrilled when they change the images this way.
I didn't know that you could have so much fun by clapping hands. I'm glad we could take part.
I like this new idea of audience participation.
This year, we wanted to make something interactive. What's good about the program is people of all ages can enjoy it simply by applauding.
People can enjoy the illumination event each evening until Christmas Day. Akane Nakajima, NHK World, Tokyo.
Nuclear safety officials say they have located potentially dangerous radioactive material that's used for medical purposes. It had been removed from a stolen truck earlier in the week. The material cobalt-60 and the truck were found abandoned outside Mexico City on Wednesday. 2 armed men stole the vehicle on Monday, not far from where the cargo was found. Officials say the radioactive material had been removed from its protective container, putting anyone who came in contact with it at risk of radiation exposure. Authorities sealed off a 500-meter perimeter around the material and sent a team in to recover it. They say there is no health risk for local residents. Cobalt-60 is used in cancer treatments and other medical applications. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been urging countries to take steps to prevent the material from falling into the wrong hands.
We need to get subscribed and get this unity stronger and beat YouTube at their own game. Okay, that's what this is about. Like I say, go to the remix button, hit the remix button. That way you'll have this video and keep up with this. Otherwise, you know, YouTube's just going to control us, guys, and it's really...
Hi, this is One for the Record. I'm Diane, and today is December 5th, 2013. Fukushima now has officially been going 1,000 days. Continuously. Alright, here's your news updates for today. Let's see here. Let's go first to the watchers watching the world. Northern Europe under the worst storm since 1953, Hurricane Xavier. Gamma ray burst stuns astronomers. Space news from Electric Universe. Signs of water found in the atmospheres of 5 distant exoplanets. Dense plume from Fukushima volcano seen by satellite. Alrighty then, let's move on. The Extinction Protocol 2012 and beyond. Earth changes. The Extinction Protocol radio. I guess they have radio now. Volcanic ash reveals rapid ice age climate change. Heads up. I guess from all the volcanoes going off, instead of just having a super volcano, which is one, they have all these volcanoes going on all over the world. 10 pilot whales die and dozens more beached in Florida. Ooh, not good. Heads up, more animal deaths. Strombolian eruption and lava flow reported at Mexico's Colima volcano. 2013 marks record year for the number of volcanoes erupting across the planet. Well, so heads up on that. Maybe it's just not one super volcano, but it's you got a massive amount of different volcanoes. It might change our climate. Alright, moving on. E&E News, Energy News. Let's see what they got going on here. The pets are sleeping. They're all passed out. Alright, today. Japan official, this is the way the reign of terror begins. Lawmakers is physically restrained, outrage as secrets bill rammed through. Final passage expected within hours. Also, expert, it's getting worse and worse at Fukushima plant. Infrastructure deteriorating, corroding very fast. TEPCO advisor, I doubt ice wall can help much. Scientist warns of radiation pulse to ocean. Scientist warns of radiation pulse to ocean. Alrighty. Japan doctor, completely beyond comprehension how huge the contamination of ocean water will be. Fukushima radioactive material poured in landfills to enter sea. It's spreading over whole world. Also, study evidence of uncontrollable nuclear reaction after Fukushima reactor shut down. Emerge criticality supported by data. Alright, let's put it another way. Isn't it child endangerment? Other than all the adults are also in danger, but I proclaim that this is the largest case of child endangerment ever in the world. What's going on at Fukushima, and it's contaminating the oceans and across the world. This is child endangerment. Someone needs to go to jail. What do you think? This is horrible. I just don't understand it. There must be some kind of wording to stop these people. Alright, let's go into also the adults and animals and everything else, but I'm just saying it's child endangerment. Maybe we can try to find some legal terminology to stop all this craziness. Okay, actually tomorrow the 6th, because they're ahead of us. TV, Bay Area officials to monitor Fukushima plume, concerns for environment and food supply. See, it's only concern. Supervisor, the risks to Californians are concerning. Everything's concerning now when they were told that they shouldn't be concerned. State Commissioner, we can't rely on Japan or TEPCO. Will cesium, strontium pollute coast? It's already there, dude. I don't understand why you don't see it. Okay. That's it. That's all they put. Then it goes back to the third about the starfish. Alrighty then. It is the eve of Friday. You be safe out there. Be ready for anything. Guess everyone's all turkeyed out now, so I guess we gotta switch to chicken. Alrighty there. See, there's the pets. See, look. They're all turkeyed out. Well, they've been eating chicken now. Passed out. Tippy's like hanging off the pillow and the couch. She has her little head on the pillow. Mac's upside down, passed out. Alrighty then, take care. And I'll see you tomorrow on the flip side. Stay safe. Stay tuned. I'm attaching Dr. Deedle and all kinds of stuff. Alrighty then.
There were a couple very big CMEs. The majority of the bulk of the energy did not come towards Earth. The CMEs occurred after Ison had passed the sun. And you could see there was like a second, it was a broad fan-shaped nose anti-tail, or sunward spike, a very broad one. And as soon as that aligned with the sun, it was a number of hours after the closest passage, you could see the sun reacting, and boom, the sun really let out a big CME, but that was it. That was about the size of the flaring activity due to Comet Ison. But I have to say this, NASA withheld the data for over 12 hours. So we had no visibility for over 12 hours, and so I don't trust at all the final data that we were able to see.
Do you think they were hiding data because they weren't sure it was going to be bigger and they didn't want the public to know? Because if they have 2 days data, continuity of government and continuity of the elite can get 2 days jump on the rest of the population if they think something big is coming our way. And I think it's part of the integrated plan that if there was a problem, they're not going to notify with Tier 1 science the regular public through the proper channels to prepare for it. They're just going to notify continuity of government and continuity of the corporate elite.
Right. Well, and so what I suspect, a number of things tell me that they really doctored the data. And first of all, the SOHO and the stereo images that are passed to the public on the public web pages are so horrible. The pixel size is so large. They're just amazingly horrible. Back in the 90s, you used to be able to go to the SOHO webpage and pull up pictures that you could go into with great detail. And none of that is available anymore. So the pictures we get are basically not worthy of a third-grade science project. That's what NASA is pawning off today. And a lot of people who don't have the historical experience like I do, they don't even know what the pictures should look like coming off of SOHO.
What do you think of all of the hoo-ha that the government put out about a CME? And I found out, I just talked to a power expert in Austin, Texas, earlier this morning, and it turned out the NERC trial was primarily to test the power grid to see if it could withstand, believe it or not, solar panels and wind power on the grid, especially California. By state law, they had to put more on. They apparently passed. This was presented last year. They passed the limit because the grid cannot withstand more solar or wind power because the surges will blow the grid apart. It doesn't even have anything to do with CMEs. In fact, it turns out that they were purposely shrouding this, and the Department of Homeland Security outgoing director Napolitano was kind of frightening the people, saying you have a 100% chance of cyber terrorism or a CME. I'm thinking, why would she make statements like that without a scientific background or even having a co-expert that actually is an expert in astrophysics make a scientific statement that can be at least challenged with a theory as to why that statement could be correct or not? But instead, They act like everything is media, and they lie to us and tell us partial truths, and then frighten us, and then try to see if they can manipulate the public. I find it very disturbing.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, what's going on today is just horrendous. The reality with Comet Ison is that it very much was a plasma discharge comet. It developed 4 sets of wings, 2 very prominent symmetrical sets of wings that developed a large spike. It looked remarkably like the pictures that we see from around the globe of the Phoenix. And, of course, the Phoenix was the image, the artistic image of the ancient comets, but kind of that squarish wing shape. And I pointed out that that's exactly the drawings that I put out when I originally did my comet research back in the 1970s. I drew those pictures because those are the electric field lines. That's the lines of electrical, the path that charged particles would follow as they come into the comet nucleus. And every step of the way, the standard apologist scientists, I don't know if you want to call them the scientists, that defend the NASA dirty snowball, all they could say is, oh, it looks like the nucleus is breaking up. Oh, it looks like the nucleus is breaking up. And they kept repeating that every time the comet did something unusual. Now they say, oh, comets are so unusual, we can't predict them. We're not making any kind of predictions at all. That's what's coming out of the NASA.
In other words, what they're trying to do is put enough obfuscation out there that no one develops a cohesive set of theories, which is how science moves forward, then challenges them to develop a construct as to how science works. So they're trying to enter us in a new dark age where Tier 2 science basically is confused and not moving forward, and Tier 1 science is bifurcated off for the elite and for globalists, and that's it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, and they expect people to listen to this garbage and not say anything. And I had an experience this week. I had the fans of mine trying to post a very simple statement. For information, go to James McCanney's webpage and then list the webpage. And they would not even allow it to be posted. These are on blogs that claim there's no editing. And there are many, many cases of people that tried to put a reference to me, my name, my webpage, and they 100% of the time blocked it from even being posted. So this just tells you the level, there had to be somebody there on all these various web pages that are supposedly for amateurs, but clearly being blocking my message from the public.
I have a feeling these are government paid ops. These are not just random people out there. I got a statement this morning that was interesting. I want to ask you about this. It turns out that there's a big CME slated to hit us today. And apparently space weather never showed any eruption on the sun on November 28th or 29th. So why all of a sudden are we getting a CME hitting us today? What's the story?
That's very interesting. I didn't see that posting. I've been monitoring.
Yeah, apparently space weather never posted it. So I had one of my listeners and send me that information. I'm thinking, yeah, you know what? Space weather didn't post it, and I usually get space weather alerts. So, if they're specifically blocking these alerts on certain days, as I say, like they block a portion of the sky with the Hubble Space Telescope, or block a bunch of data in a data stream, they're hiding something. When we come back, we'll hear your full answer. Your questions out there, 800-259-5791. And do they know something about something coming? And is there a kill shot kind of event that can happen? Welcome back, and Professor McCanney, there's two things. Out of these Kreutz-type comets, we've over a century, and the ISON is one of the most dramatic. It's obvious that they've been covering up data. Today we just demonstrated that and I'm going to read off the actual NOAA statement from Space Weather. It says, NOAA forecasts an estimated 25% chance of polar geomagnetic storms on December 2nd, when a CME might deliver a glancing blow to Earth's magnetic field. High latitude sky watchers should be alert for auroras. Well, they didn't report a solar storm. And then you mentioned before the break that they probably photoshopped out the actual core because it was supposed to graze the sun at about 700,000 kilometers. It wasn't supposed to disappear. They report it's being broken up and, quote, it's just dust. It says, Comet Ison, RIP, rest in peace. Following the Thanksgiving Day brush with a solar fire, sun-diving Comet Ison is now just a cloud of dust. Among experts, a consensus is building that the comet broke apart shortly before perihelion. That's the closest approach to the sun. In the movie, most note how rapidly the comet just fades before it vanishes behind the occulting disk of the SOHO. But we know if it actually crashed in the sun, it was going to cause a big storm. And obviously, a CME is hitting us. It's going to cause polar geomagnetic storms. The real question is, number one, what tier 1 science are they hiding? Which, of course, is obviously that there's tons of energy in the solar system. So we don't even need energy from nuclear fission, which is the old-style San Onofre, Fukushima-style reactors. Number two, energy is the economy, is the currency of the planet. It's not dollars, it's not even gold, it's energy. So you've changed that whole paradigm with this comet and what you predicted. But the real issue is we got people like Major Ed Dames, who, by the way, I found this out from one of my colleagues, that he never was, quote, in as a remote viewer. He was a supervisor, and he's making a really big deal and really big money, I think. Also, these conferences could he, quote, kill shot, although they won't set dates, saying the sun's going to send off a giant CME, and there's going to be major power outages that are going to cause social havoc on the planet. And there'll be, quote, kill zones and survival zones, and they have, quote, remotely viewed maps. Now, I see a lot of hoo-ha on the internet, and I can tell you I'm getting sick and tired of it. I want to know what real science is out there, and I want to not hear from people who, from my own sources, have said Ed Dames was never, quote, a remote viewer, whatever the heck that is. And number two, what's the science behind it, and do we have tier 1 science that can warn us? For example, if we know a solar storm is coming, we got 2 days at least advance warning before the plasma and the other factors hit us. Usually 2 to 3 days before so we can bear down, turn off our power grids, hunker down, cover our things with Faraday cages, and be ready for the event. We don't have to have everything fried, but we do have a real danger with CMEs caused by warfare, such as a fishing boat shooting up 100,000 foot, small EMP-2 type nuclear device that could be barely detectable a few hundred miles offshore, and then all of a sudden there's 1,500 radio miles, everything's blacked out. So EMP warfare is part of the 21st century. When I hear the comments from the Department of Homeland Security, it doesn't give me any sense of comfort. It gives me a sense of manipulation. It gives me a sense of anger. And I want to know what the science is, Professor McKinney, because there's a lot of fools out there running with things that don't make sense. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a huge problem. And the ticket to gain attention today is alarmism. And one thing I try and do, I talk about the dangers of comets, of CMEs. I was talking about this before NASA or before any of these other people ever imagined it. I did the initial pioneering work on this back in the late 1970s, the interaction of electromagnetic conditions around the sun. But you have to take every case individually, have to analyze it for what it is. So yeah, people who are just making predictions based on error and making money out of the fear of people, first of all, they're not accountable. A lot of the people that make false predictions about Planet X have done it 50 times. In an email or in a broadcast or some other kind of warning. And then they go on, and there's no accountability for these people. And then they're doing the same thing next week, that Comet Elenin was Planet X, and Comet Ison was Planet X. But you have to understand that a lot of this is a well-orchestrated misinformation program. And what I've discovered is a lot of these people have handlers. That's the nicest way I can put it.
In other words, what you're saying is that your handlers being
money under the table,
right,
promoting their web pages, making sure that they have a government scientist on their staff to make them look legitimate. on and on and on, projecting themselves on web pages, editing out any bad comments about them. Whenever there's a blog, making sure that there's a comment in there so people think that they're legitimate. So there's amazing amount of misinformation being propagated, and it's all centrally controlled. And it's all targeted towards creating false information for the public.
Well, here's what I say. What I suspect: America's real space program is many decades ahead of what people think. Tier 1 science, you know, the idea that we haven't been back to the moon is ridiculous. The idea we don't have, near-Earth space weapons platforms, etc., and technologies. In fact, one of the quotes that I had was that, that most of this read from Space Command when I was security cleared there, was that most of the space weapons platforms are aimed out in space at near-Earth objects that are weaponed by us or other things, and that, in fact, Tier 1 science is completely separated from Tier 2. It's run by private corporations like Bechtel Corp and many other corporations. They have trillions of dollars of money that's shunted to them through the Federal Reserve, etc. And we have basically government by corporations now. I call it Earth Inc.
Promoting their web pages, making sure that they have a government scientist on their staff to make them look legitimate, on and on and on, projecting themselves on web pages, editing out any bad comments about them. Whenever there's a blog, making sure that there's a comment in there so people think that they're legitimate. So there's amazing amount of misinformation being propagated, and it's all centrally controlled. And it's all targeted towards creating false information for the public.
Well, here's what I say. What I suspect: America's real space program is many decades ahead of what people think. Tier 1 science, the idea that we haven't been back to the moon is ridiculous. The idea we don't have, near-Earth space weapons platforms, etc., and technologies. In fact, one of the quotes that I had was that, that most of this read from Space Command when I was security cleared there, was that most of the space weapons platforms are aimed out in space at near-Earth objects that are weaponed by us or other things, and that, in fact, Tier 1 science is completely separated from Tier 2. It's run by private corporations like Bechtel Corp and many other corporations. They have trillions of dollars of money that's shunted to them through the Federal Reserve, etc. And we have basically government by corporations now. I call it Earth Inc. The stretched skins of the former nations like America and other nations has been stretched over the superstructure of a giant corporation now that runs the planet through this interlocking directorate of corporations that control every political system, whether it's the so-called social communism of communist China that's a new form of market communism, or it's the kind of new proletariat type of socialism of Obama, which is a communist, corporatist, or it's the type of socialism you get in Canada or Europe. Every single system is just a different face of the same beast, which is ultimately behind it are corporations that have bifurcated Tier 1 science for the elite and Tier 2 science for everybody else, which is basically disinformation. I find it very disturbing, and it doesn't matter if it's the Food and Drug Administration attacking 23andMe on doing 250 gene tests and telling you what your genetic weaknesses are and your heritage, or Tier 1 science telling you what the real dangers are of the power grid. Even something as simple as the NERC trial, they could have come out and simply said, we don't think that the power grid can withstand what our laws have already passed to put on more solar and wind. Why didn't they come out and say that? Why didn't they say, when there's a CME coming, hey, you need to start hunkering down to cover your electronics with Faraday cages, and just allow the public to be informed? No, they tell us, be prepared for disaster, and they don't tell you what they're going to do to help. I mean, the government, they have the anti-Midas touch. They don't help. They just provide fear and disinformation. When we come back, we're going to hear more from Professor McKenna. Your questions. This is important because when you hear the government a lot of drums on a couple of key issues and a lot of disinformation ops, you know something's coming up. Yeah, it's kind of silly, isn't it? Welcome back. So the first thing we have is we have a lot of disinformation, which means is where it's like I used to live in British Columbia where I did locums back in the late 1970s. I did my internal medicine, and I can tell you that when you see a forest fire, and the forest fire has been put out, but it's still burning underground, the roots are burning, it can pop up months later. When you see smoke, there's fire somewhere. And so when you see a lot of disinformation up, you see a lot of money handlers and everything, you know something is amiss. When you see public statements that just don't make sense, there's no science presented, so you can't challenge it. I had an interesting discussion this morning with an electrical engineer, and I said, between the politicians and the regulators and the attorneys, there's a 38-point IQ gap between the public and them. We're 38 points on average smarter than the ones that regulators, our politicians, our lawyers, our politicians that try to pass more laws. And we want to ask questions just because we want to know why they're suggesting things. For example, when they did this NERC trial, well, the same thing goes with people like Ed Dames. What is he out there doing? What is Marshall Masters doing when he talks about Bluebonnet and the idea of a Planet X? I was one of the security cleared doctors taking care of people working at the SPT back in the mid-90s from Colorado Springs. I took care of the team doing entry and exit exams on them that would go down to the SPT scope looking for near space objects or deep space objects in the Oort cloud. And I can tell you there was no evidence that I saw of it coming. Although I do know that these hyperelliptical comets, they suspect something may be pushing them in, but that could be God knows how long away. We know there are cataclysmic events that happened. In 1989, there was an event that was one-third the strength of the Carrington event of 1815, was 1859? I'm trying to remember the date.
I don't remember the exact date.
It was an approximate date around there. Anyway, the 1989 event was one-third, and it was enough to knock out the power because of the long lines at the James Bay Hydro Project. If we just had a James Bay type event in North America, a lot of the power grid would be chewed up. It would knock it all out. And it would primarily knock out satellites and the power grid, but it probably wouldn't knock out your car. It would knock out your home computers and things like that, but the power grid wouldn't make it. Big long lines, especially where there's an inductive thing, that's what they did, is they broke up the lines and realized if you have long lines, they're more likely to pick up power and break down the equipment, which can take months to replace, especially if it's remote. What's the real danger of we call a kill shot? Well, we want to know the predictive science based on it. I think that they're, obviously, when they're not reporting the solar storms, and then today we're getting hit with the CME, it's obvious that the powers that be don't want the regular Tier 2 scientists, and we call the amateur astronomers like me that have like a video camera on my telescope and I can point up at the sky. They don't want us to have any kind of information. They don't want us to have anything even to kind of challenge or even put together a thesis as to why what they're saying is true or garbage. And I find this particularly disturbing.
There's a huge effort to literally blanket on all outlets, complete misinformation. And then the most intelligent thing that you can find today on web pages regarding Comet Ison or any other comet is, they're unpredictable. We really can't predict anything. We can report to you what they did after they did it, and then they don't speculate. They say, well, we certainly have a lot to learn. And when I've been explaining these details, these phenomenon, for example, when Comet Ison just simply developed spikes or brightened, that was the day that it came in electrical conjunction with Mercury. I had predicted that 6 months earlier. I said Comet Ison will brighten on this day. It went 6 times. And what's the best that standard science can come up with? We think the nucleus may have split and opened up a new vein of ice. I mean, it's draw the prize out of the Kellogg Post-Toasties box theory.
Yeah.
It's so pathetic.
But the old saying in Latin is "qui bono." Who's going to benefit? Who's going to benefit from Tier 1 science? And I'm just going to lay out what I know. And again, it's only a partial level of knowledge. Number one, the level of, we have tokamak fusion reactors already. What you've laid out from your research and actually just demonstrating with the passage of Comet Ison is that the universe fits exactly your electric universe theory, the plasma universe theory, which means there's limitless energy even in solar and galactic space. So there's actually no deficiency in sources of energy for our planet, which means no pollution, limitless in a sense, economy, in other words, if the real economy is money, is energy, there's no reason to have pollution, and we can have limitless growth of production of facilities, growing plants, not having the kind of commerce that has to be distributed, and third world countries can actually have an economy because they have limitless energy. Number two, it means that a lot of the warfare that we have that is always planned is obsolete, because with limitless energy, and you know the Tier 1 science is there, they can use plasma physics, and I know this because I had security clearance, that we have plasma weapons like the Tesla weapons. They can create a plasma explosion over any city using plasma interferometry. So that we don't even need to fire a missile or a bullet. We have plasma weapons that are, like Buck Rogers in the 25th century, but we're in the 21st century and we already have them. The fact is, the government's hiding things. I talked to Professor Dr. Ron Claps, who's head of A4M, and I'm presenting my theories. There's 26,000 doctors belong to our association, a lot of smart docs. And we are unraveling the whole process of aging and taking over, in a sense, human, if you want to call it, re-engineering. And re-engineering is simple. We start off with feeding the body the right non-toxic nutrients that overcome genetic defects. If you've got a genetic polymorphism and you can't convert and activate folic acid, that might not seem a big deal, but 25% of the population has a GNP SNP, or single nucleotide polymorphism. If you jump to GNP, that causes you to turn diabetic, get cancer, have dementia, get autism, or unleashes your IQ, so you have an IQ over 200 instead of just barely over 100, that's a big deal. If we unleash the genetics so people live to be 200 or 300 years of age or more, or as they say, at some point, we're going to basically not have limited biology, where people basically, they only live as long as they don't have an accident. They did an actuarial study, and they said if people could live, quote, biologically forever, the average person would be 475 years of age, because somewhere along the line, somebody would do something stupid, or an accident would just happen. Well, the fact is, Tier 1 science doesn't want that. They're not prepared for a population that basically has unlimited age, cybernetically connected to an unlimited source of database, unlimited energy, the ability of third world countries to no longer be under the boot of a globalist controlled central banking system, intelligent public who can move forward and not be shackled by giant corporations. Look at the amount of citizen astronomers. The NASA and these other people actually look at citizens astronomers to pick up even nearer space objects. They don't have enough eyes in the sky to outdo what the public can with their own telescopes in the backyard.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that the amateur astronomers have very good equipment today.
Right.
But unfortunately, we have an atmosphere here, and for example, the good data regarding Comet ISON, NASA has 60 space-based instruments looking at Comet ISON. We did not get one single shred of data from any of that. And I'm proposing something on the air, Dr. Bill, that I'm proposing that NASA has entered the area of criminal behavior. This is all the way from the top down to the bottom. Right. And it's called insider trading, harboring data collected with public funds to guard their collective behinds, because they need that money to keep going. And if you look at the structure that's set up now, you have yo-yos like Bill Blake or a guy named Kerry Liss from Goddard, who sponsors a webpage in which they have a disclaimer that they're not sponsored by NASA, not related to NASA, but here these guys are sitting in their office, or Carl of the Naval Observatory, who are in cahoots with this effort to block information from the public, starting NASA at a distance, and NASA can sit back, hide the data, and pretend like everything's fine.
Right. Yeah, it's we need some real science, and I'm really glad you can come on the program today, because ISON, I don't think it's passed. I think the main core has passed through the heliosphere, and it's God knows where it's going, but I don't think it's gone.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions have an echo in so much space.
30 or 50 kilometers across, it's big.
And when you're out there without care, I was out of
Welcome Welcome back, and a couple questions for Professor McKinney. I've been reading recently that there's some pretty good evidence that our culture, that human beings had a high culture, and somewhere between 35 and 13,000 years ago, and it crashed when a comet either passed by or impacted on the Earth, and it caused us to go back into 1,000 years of an ice age. And that we're coming out of a major ice age, and we crashed back into one, and had 1,000 years of darkness, and that only the subsistence parts of humanity survived the high culture, and there's pretty good evidence that there was high culture in a number of continents that had a very advanced technology. That's why the myths are passed down about Atlantis, etc., that these ancient cultures didn't make it. For example, there's pretty good evidence that the pyramids were not made, and we can see this with the disinformation from Zaki Hawass and the Egyptians. They continue to lie and tell us that they think that ancient Egyptians built the pyramids. What a bunch of hogwash. There's no way human beings with even our technology today could build the pyramids. So the fact is they had to have a high culture that higher levels of science than we have. And we know there's all kinds of evidence that that the world crashed, that we had something cataclysmic happen about 13,000 years ago. And from what I can read, the most likely event was either the passage or an impact of a comet. Even just a passage could cause us to go whip back into an ice age. What do you think, Professor McKinney? Because there's a lot of evidence. I mean, for example, one of the first things I was taught at U.S. Space Command was that the Black Knight satellite, which is out in polar orbit, which we've only succeeded in doing for the last 10, 12 years, has been up there between 35 and 13,000 years. That's how long it's been there, and it's larger than the U.S. International Space Station. And it's out in polar orbit at 22,000 miles inside the inner ring of the third ring of the Van Allen radiation belt. So it's placed in a proper position, but it's in polar orbit, which is very unusual. And this is not it's a man-made object, okay? It's a artificial object, and they've known about it forever. And it's one of the very first things they told me, so you don't freak out when you find out all these things about all the disinformation garbage we've been feeding the public, because you're one of ours now, and you're going to find these things out. I think that comets are a heck of a lot more dangerous than we realize. And what I was told at Space Command is 95% of our work at Space Command was to identify these near space objects, find out what the heck's going on in our solar system, and try to manage it. And now we've got shards of debris because the Chinese have been doing testing up there, and they've been blowing up satellites as well with their kinetic weapons, so they cause literally if you want to call it a phalanx of dangerous debris flying at 35,000 miles an hour around the planet that makes it even harder to put things up into space. Just like this movie that came out, Gravity, about something blowing up and then all the debris flying around the planet and ripping things apart. Yeah, this is what it's like. It's dangerous. And when you have comets, they can do really bad things. That's why every ancient tapestry in the Middle Ages and right back to the ancient world, comets were harbingers of death. And even the comet, Halley's Comet, they identified the chemical structure literally has nerve gas agents that cause neuromuscular paralysis and death. These are literally analogs and chemical analogs of cyanide. And people think, oh, well, the comets are not dangerous. You don't even need to pass through a comet. You can just pass through the tail of it. They can cause major weather changes, in your plasma universe theory suggests that comets can do a lot of things besides just their direct effect, their action at a distance, their plasma effects, their effects on the sun, their effects on their weather and volcanism on the Earth, earthquakes. They do a lot of bad stuff, don't they?
Yeah, I get that.
Your voice is a little bit scratchy now. I'm hoping we can, it'll come back here on, I think on Skype, perhaps. We'll see if we can reconnect with Professor McKinney to get an answer on that before we close for the hour. Maybe we'll get him back on the third hour. So those are questions. And again, I tell people the most important thing is to ask better questions, because whether it's seeking your health, and for example, I'm just going to summarize we get into the first segment in hour number one. Some of the principles are going to be in book number one of my Quantum Functional Medicine. It'll be coming out in a CD. I'm going to be later posting it up on ebooks such as Amazon, etc. But it'll be in a CD you can only purchase here. And it's going to explain principles that you probably, if you're into functional medicine, into natural medicine, herbology, or energy medicine, there'll be principles there you've never heard of before, even if you've been into this for decades. And they're ones that can be measured. You know, it's not just airy-fairy out there. They can be measured. The same way as we can We have all these satellites in space, including the conjoint project with the Germans to put an infrared telescope up at 40,000 feet in a 747 aircraft to look for infrared objects in deep space, such as a returning, quote, Planet X, which I don't like to call Planet X. Planet X means 10. There's lots of, quote, Planet X or large objects out there that are whipping through the solar system, like rogue planets, large comets, asteroids that are not following a specific track orbit. Some of them are pushed in from deep space from the Oort cloud at 0.73 light years out. But comets are extremely dangerous. And when you hear the government make these kinds of statements, it's like, you know, the Younger Dryas period was almost certainly caused by a comet, which causes it to plunge into an ice age and kill most of humanity. We know that also comets can trigger off earthquakes and volcanoes. There was a burgeoning population of ancient mankind at 75,000 years ago in Tonga. The island in Indonesia blew up and caused basically a major collapse of the population of Earth, so we're down to literally tens of thousands of human beings left on the planet. We know that there were major explosions, probably going back in the ancient world. There were basically people on in North America before even the ice bridge across from China and across the Siberian Peninsula over to North America. There were people here on Earth, on the North American continent, that were wiped out. Those ancient peoples no longer existed when the people crossed the ice bridge and came to North America. Those people were extinct, and those civilizations were long gone. So there's a lot more to Earth than what we think, and mankind has risen and fallen many times. Some of it's through its own stupidity, and I think, to be honest with you, it's going to take all of the best scientists of all the best countries on Earth in order to protect us against not only ourselves with stupid wars that we want to do, but also against near-Earth space objects, anything from giant gamma bursts in the universe to solar storms to increased debris in the space. For example, we're passing through an area of James, we're back. So James, what do you think of those questions I just asked about the Younger Dryas period and the dangers to, right now we're heading into, technically, and this is according to the Russian Space Agency, Dr. HUBBLE Adamazatov, Dr. Easterbrook, and others, we're heading into at least a Maunder-type ice age. We've got decreased sunspot activity. We have these big bursts of storms that are occurring, but they're out of kind of character. What's really going on, and what's the real science, and what are the dangers to our civilization? Because I think civilization is an anomaly. I think that every so many thousand years there's recurring cataclysms that crunch society and reset it. And I think that our Tier 1 science knows that and is hiding it from us, whether it's a returning object, because I've heard very good evidence that every 3,615 roughly years there's a returning set of, whether it's comets or a quote Planet X object or whatever, but there's a reset button. There's a reset button that occurs every 10,800 to 11,000 years. We know that there's ice age cycles 105,000, 11,800, and a Maunder type cycle every 375 years that occurs as recurring cycles. So on top of these recurring cycles, there's long cycles, 26 million years, etc. And these are what I call extinction level events or near extinction level events. And I think the Tier 1 science knows a heck of a lot more than they're telling us, because they don't want the public to quote panic about what's going to happen or what could happen. Right before I got cut off, I was talking about Velikovsky, and he talked about one particular event 3,500 years ago. And by the way, before we go, I want to make sure
that happened prior to that, many thousands of years prior to that. I call the Velikovsky Venus event, I call that the Noah or the Moses event.
Right.
And we know that thousands of years earlier there was a vast flood, and that was Noah. And we know these events were spaced by thousands of years, and that they devastated the population of the world. So yeah, these things happen regularly. When Solon, who was, I believe, Aristotle's great uncle, went back to Egypt, he wanted to know about the disasters, and the Egyptian priest told him that these things happened every number of thousands of years.
Exactly. And then, by the way, trained by the high priest was Moses, whose name was Odab. He was supposed to be the next pharaoh. not Ramesses II, who was a inbred inferior. We'll be back in a moment. Professor McKenny, if you can stay over the top of the hour, we have an open segment, and we can have you back further in hour 3. This needs to be discussed because something's afoot, and we know that there's a lot of chatter all over the place on this. And you're completing it, right?
Yes.
Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and out there, if you're listening, you may or may not know this, but when you start work in the 20th century, was invented basically by two men, Nikola Tesla and Albert Einstein. And the man who's actually bringing it to its final fruition in terms of demonstrating it with the passage of these Ison and Kreutz comets is none other than, published over many years, Professor James McKenny. And what he's doing on the level of the solar system and galaxy, which is plasma physics, I'm explaining the plasma physics in my first book called Quantum Functional Medicine with the physical body. Everything in the physical body is charged molecules and frequencies and harmonic capacitors, which means it builds up energy and discharges it. And what you've explained, Professor McKenny, is very, very earth-changing. You see, Tier 1 science is terrified of the idea of people having limitless access to energy and information. Right now, the internet has transformed the world. The thing that's chewing away at the culture of China, where their one-child policy is dying, and their Laodai camps are going to have to shut down. And they even have now boxes for people to get rid of their children so they won't kill them, because there's more new Christians in China. 80% of the new Christians on earth are Chinese every day. People are being transformed by just learning decency from each other. People are starting to ask questions about science and about why are they hiding things from us, and why do we get disinformation on the sewer net, I call it, instead of the internet? Why do we have these phony shows with phony experts all talking about things when real scientists like yourself say, you know what, this Ison comet demonstrates we have limitless energy out there. We don't have a problem. They create a problem so they can get dialectics of control, the same way as the healthcare system. They just went after and gave a letter to the 23andMe, the chromosome company, the most successful one, 250 gene tests, including measuring your heritage, for $99. 23andme.com, 23andme.com. And when Professor McKenny does this, and I want you to explain this, Professor McKenny, what you've done with your website and your publications and your material is you literally open the door for the third millennium. Because with limitless energy, with really understanding near space and what the benefits and dangers, there isn't a civilization. Because, as I mentioned in the first hour, we're talking about this, what's called the Younger Dryas period, which occurred 13,000 years ago, that trashed our ancient civilizations and probably truncated the higher orders of culture that had advanced technology that built a lot of these ancient monuments, including the Sphinx and the pyramids. Those pyramids were not created by Egyptians. They were created by a higher culture, much more ancient than what we were told. They were not built by Egyptians. It's a pile of garbage. And we have to understand that there's lots of underground cities falling all over the world because there's ancient cataclysms that occurred to our planet. There were ancient elite that hid in those facilities trying to hide away from the disasters coming. Some of them had advanced knowledge. The high priest of ancient Egypt, who even taught Moses, he was fully informed about these recurring cyclic disasters. So, Professor McKenny, let's talk about this. What you're showing and demonstrating in your science and your website, jmccsci.com, is really important because a lot of people are worried about martial law. And I'm just going to say this again so people will get it. Martial law is not doable unless the public cooperates, period. If they don't frighten you into a biological weapon release or a CME with a power outage, they cannot get cooperation. If the government doesn't have cooperation of the public, the more they pour in foreign troops, Chinese, Russian, or so-called black ski mask guys, the more those guys are going to die. And the harder we're going to get hardened by that event to make it damn impossible to crush us. Even if they kill a lot of us off, they're going to make our descendants and whoever's left a lot nastier. So the fact is the government knows this and they're terrified. They're terrified of us having life extension technology. They're terrified of us having energy access technology. They're terrified of us even having access to the internet. They want to have authentication so they can know right where your butt is, right down to a cubic meter. They want to know an authentication on your cell phone where you are, which your location services are, on your iPad Air or your cell phone. They're terrified of you as an individual having a clue and figuring out what's going on and being a sentient individual of a herd of advanced human beings asking good questions. They're terrified of it, aren't they?
Remember, Dr. Bill, when there were boxes at your workplace or at the bank and they said, donate your cell phone? What do you mean, donate your cell phone? Nobody was going to use those old used cell phones. What they were doing is taking all the cell phones out of existence that didn't have tracking capability on them. And people were handing them in like Johnny Be Good. And so, being the foreseeing person that I am, I managed to keep quite a few of those. And I hope there's many other people that did also. You'll notice now that the new SIM cards will not work in those old phones. And that's the last step to obsolescence of phones that don't track you. But at any rate, I want to talk a little bit about the electrical nature of the human body. Basically, yeah, our
ski mask guys, the more of those guys are going to die. And the harder we're going to get hardened by that event to make it damn impossible to crush us. Even if they kill a lot of us off, they're going to make our descendants and whoever's left a lot nastier. So the fact is the government knows this and they're terrified. They're terrified of us having life extension technology. They're terrified of us having energy access technology. They're terrified of us even having access to the internet. They want to have authentication so they can know right where your butt is, right down to a cubic meter. They want to know an authentication on your cell phone where you are, what your location services are, on your iPad Air or your cell phone. They're terrified of you as an individual having a clue and figuring out what's going on and being a sentient individual of a herd of advanced human beings asking good questions. They're terrified of it, aren't they?
Remember, Dr. Bill, when there were boxes at your workplace or at the bank and they said, donate your cell phone? What do you mean, donate your cell phone? Nobody was going to use those old used cell phones. What they were doing is taking all the cell phones out of existence that didn't have tracking capability on them. And people were handing them in like Johnny Be Good. And so, being the foreseeing person that I am, I managed to keep quite a few of those. And I hope there's many other people that did also. You'll notice now that the new SIM cards will not work in those old phones. And that's the last step to obsolescence of phones that don't track you. But at any rate, I want to talk a little bit about the electrical nature of the human body. Basically, yeah, our entire nervous system is electrical, but we are a giant antenna. We read electrical signals. And when I was working with the Russian atmospheric scientists in the mid-90s from the University of Novosibirsk, it was interesting that some of the psychologists at that school became interested in my work. They heard about it. And so they started doing electroanalysis of babies, of unborn babies. And they realized that when the babies were born, first of all, they realized that the babies were responding to planetary electrical alignments and other electrical conditions in the solar system. And especially when comets would come through, babies that were born at that time had a different sense of reality, so to speak. Because they were tuned.
So in other words, what you're proving is that there's this astrological connection. In fact, if you go to the ancient Bible before it became disturbed by what I call the perversion of Kabbalism, which is all mathematics, basically. Ancient Kabbalism, ancient mathematics, ancient astronomy knew about these things and knew that it affected the physical and the genetic and the epigenetics of human and other biological systems. They knew that there's a reality to these specific angles, action at a distance, dipole effects, frequency effects of the position of the planets and et cetera and events in space, that they had specific biological effects, didn't they?
Absolutely, and so they had an empirical knowledge of what these effects were because they studied them, and a lot of people retain their sensitivity after birth, but this is what they were reading in these babies is when they were born, The moment of birth and the position of the planets was very important because that's what started the baby to have all of the influences of the senses, touch, sound, sight, smell, etc. And so those, for many people, take over and then control their existence from then on. However, there's a percentage of people who remain very attuned to their electrical environment. And so there are times, for example, during a new moon or a full moon, when everybody's a bit on edge, or oddly enough, a situation called retrograde, Mercury in retrograde, where Mercury, we have electrical aligned with Mercury. Mercury is very powerful electrically because it's so close to the sun. And that's why, by the way, Comet Ison really pumped up in energy when it's on that 13th and 14th of November, just like I predicted, because of its electrical interaction with the planet Mercury. But back to people. We are electrical. In our system, we have our entire being is an electrical antenna. So we read the signals. We read the vibrations of the Earth. We read the vibrations of the ionosphere. We read the vibrations during a storm, electrical storm. We read the vibrations during planetary alignments or the new moon.
Yeah, without a Schumann resonance generator the Russians discovered in the space station and their space probes and their space stations, they could not maintain human biology and genetics. And they realized that literally the pulsatile frequency literally brushes the electrons out and literally allows our genes to express themselves. Every circuit in the body you can measure in picovolts and microamps in a spectral pattern. You have to raise the energy electron density in tissues in order to heal and get the body alkaline. Welcome back, and Professor McKinney will be back in just a moment. It's amazing how we have a brilliant man like Professor McKinney who understands not only the plasma physics of the solar system, but everything is, in a sense, plasma basically means it either has an extra charge or has less charge. And plasma physics applies to everything, including in a sense, it applies a subatomic, we want to call it particle physics, is basically a form of plasma. Charges of objects, of subatomic particles that have equal or opposite or other charges that literally hold matter together, or the probability we call fields that we call matter and specific isotopes. And would also explain how we can get rid of isotopes using specific harmonic energies that can destroy radioactive isotopes with the right harmonic frequencies. Now here's how we correct it. When you use acupuncture, you're trying to correct the energy pathways and fields. We have, of course, technologies. You need to use the power of ones I call oxygen, which is why we have mild hyperbaric oxygen. Nutrimeds, extremely important to preload, and if I get your wellness history, that alone, and my intuitive talents, I will be able to give you a prescription as to what nutraceuticals you need. The next step is, if you can, for yourself and your family, get a QRMA machine, it makes a major difference, because then you can send me your results. I can tell you exactly what nutraceuticals you need to change those parameters. We can see how fast it's changing. You can do the test you want to, daily or weekly. Then, of course, we have the YK19 detox device that will measure what toxins are in your body and how to get them out. You must be taking the nutraceuticals to grab those nutraceutical toxins. And then we have the 3D NLS, and I have different packages now available to these. The 3D NLS is a thermodynamic analysis by the Russian Space Agency, working with American and Chinese scientists over 34 years, that actually will not only section through up to 250 organ systems right down to the specific cell and subcellular organelle, but it'll tell you in the body section exactly where the pathology is. In fact, I have a published study I posted on there that says it's more accurate for picking up, say, breast cancer or cervical cancer and its secondary metastases than even a CT or MRI scan. So everything is plasma physics. And this is what Linus Pauling was talking about. So my first book out, called Quantum Functional Medicine, applies plasma physics to the bit body and why you have to have the right nutraceuticals in their activated form. Why you need to know if you have genetic defects like 23andMe, if you send me that data, if you get those tests done, or if you do genetic tests at Genova Labs in Nashville, or now in Atlanta, Georgia, or Metametrics Lab or Doctor's Data. Why you need to know what your organic acids are so I can look at parameters of why a genetic defect or a metabolic problem or a toxin is present. Because the plasma physics applies to everything. And that's why when you're exposed to cell phones and Wi-Fi networks and smart meters, when you're exposed to a de-resing agent, I call it, like the video games the kids play, such as, you know, radioisotopes that are affecting your mitochondria, they're stealing electrons from your tissue. All toxins, all radioisotopes, and all scalar pollution, like smart meters, steals electrons from tissues and makes you develop, if you want to call it, little hot spots or cold spots, where they're acidotic, electron deficient, and there's a relative potential difference to the surrounding tissue. That explains it in a simple way, doesn't it, Professor McKinney?
Yeah, exactly. The amazing thing about cell phones, that what an industry that's gotten away with basically murder with, cell phones. What people don't realize is, the average test for a cell phone is published by the manufacturer. But what they don't tell you is if you're in an elevator or if you're in a remote location, then your cell phone is ramping up and putting out as much power as can be, just putting out the equivalent of a small microwave oven. People are holding this in their hand, they're holding it up to their head, and there was an experiment that they could do with an older version cell phone. They would take two cell phones, connect a call, and then they would put the two cell phones together so they had positive feedback. Right. And they could fry an egg with the microwave energy coming off of the cell phone.
And by the way, that's just the thermal effect. You get non-thermal effects that we call harmonic. So with picotesla levels of energy that tune to a specific frequency, you can induce an enzyme like ornithine transcarbamylase, inducible nitric oxide synthase. It can produce free radicals like in the cells or body. It can disrupt specific genes. It can have harmonic effects at communication inside the cell and between cells. It can cause atavistic turning on of genes that should always stay turned off. Those genes are ancient parts of our chromosomes that are already in the off stage. And that's why we see increased rates of cancer. For example, if you have a cell phone on the dominant hand, that eighth cranial nerve tumor is 3 times more likely in people that use cell phones more than X number of minutes per month. This is just a fact. It's not something that's out there as speculation. That's why in France, it's against the law to sell a cell phone to a child under 14. That's how dangerous this is. So people need to know that these are not safe objects. For example, we have at LSCMF, we have a little shield where you can put your cell phone in and the front face of it is open so you can still receive a call, but it's not going to back radiate against your body. So if you have this in your purse and the purse is hanging out, or if you have it in your pocket's there, the cell phone can still receive a call, but it's not going to radiate in toward your testicles or your groin. And that's one of the simple Christmas presents you can get. You can get 3 packs at LSCMF. Now, how this applies to the body, when you want to heal somebody, you need to do 3 things. You need to raise the redox potential, which is why we have things like liquid electrons, Power C+, full vitamin K2, Nutritrella, cell detox glutathione, and Regenerex that raise your electron density. You have energy technology like the Soma Pulse developed at NASA, Lumen Photon, even infrared sauna. All these things inject energy into the body. You need to add extra oxygen. That's why we have fitness training. FiberSlim is very good, Rebounder is very good, but ultimately the mild hyperbaric chamber is ideal. Every home should have one if you want to stay healthy and well. Infrared sauna is good for helping pull the toxins out, but in all cases, if you don't have the right nutraceuticals present when you start yanking these things out, you're going to get bystander damage. And then you want to have the proper energy balancing. So with the 3D NLS, it not only will come down with a harmonic frequency of thermodynamic analysis, even down to a diagnosis of what's wrong, you can do therapeutic frequencies to actually break the physiological circuits that are there to keep the illness present. See, the body can stay in a chronic state like chronic bronchitis or chronic asthma or chronic viral infection or chronic cervicitis from human papillomavirus because the circuit is there, the abnormal unwellness physiological plasma physics is there. It's literally like a squeal in a PA system. Professor McKinney, can you explain that a bit? Because people need to realize that there are, we call abnormal circuits that maintain the ill state in tissues.
Yeah, the body, let's give a good example here. A lot of people have, say, a chronic liver condition, or it might be a lung condition, or it might be, I talked with a woman the other day that had a chronic hearing problem. She was hearing noises.
Right.
And basically, 95% of these come back to a bad connection with the nervous system to the backbone. And so if you have bad signal, if you have a blocked signal from your backbone out to a group of organs or a cluster of organs or an area, say a muscular region, that muscle is pinching a nerve, which then spasms the muscle, and then it starts choking up blood vessels. Just that nerve losing its signal is enough to cause a lot of damage, and it left
you always find you always find energetics and dysautonomia at every level of the illness. Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report. Let's demonstrate what we're talking about with something simple like fibromyalgia. Just had a request and a consult over the weekend. And